Israel launches a ground operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The General Staff prepared an offensive plan. What is happening in the Middle East? Will there be a full-scale war? The USSR stopped the Russian offensive in Kursk and carried out its own large-scale operation in the rear of the Russian Federation. We will not only talk about this right now with our guest, with Israeli military analyst David Sharp. David, hello, I'm Israel. Hi.
Hello, Anastasia. Thank you for your words of support. This is very, very important.
Before we start, I will ask our viewers to like this broadcast, write your comments, write your questions to our guest, but do not forget to indicate from which city, from which country you are watching us. Israel launches a ground operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Israeli General Staff has prepared an offensive plan. The Netanyahu government has adopted it, according to Israeli media. Well, they all say that Netanyahu said that residents from the north will return home, and at the same time, Defense Minister Galland also said that this operation is inevitable. David, what is this new stage of the war? Will it lead to a full-scale confrontation?
If the new stage is indeed a new stage, then it implies a large-scale confrontation and a large-scale ground operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The fact is, however, that despite the talk and the raising of tensions, no final decision on this large-scale operation has yet been made. Well, let's put it this way, or it has been adopted, but in any case, it has not yet begun. Theoretically, it cannot be ruled out that it will begin in the very near future, but perhaps there is not even such a decision. However, what is there? Of course, there is a change in tone on the part of the Israeli leadership. And you quoted the head of government. He said that the return of evacuated residents from the north of Israel, and the north of Israel at the 5-kilometer border, in fact, since October 10 last year, has turned into a kind of semi-sanitary zone. More than 60,000 people have left their homes. Many of them, by the way, have been destroyed, and are methodically destroyed by terrorists on a daily basis. For example, the launch of an anti-tank guided missile in line of sight at a private house leads to its partial destruction. Now imagine that 300-odd days is almost a year, and it's like this almost every day. Only from this method you can easily destroy 1,000 or more houses, which is quite a lot. But that's not even the point. There is a decision of the formal Israeli cabinet for waging war, let's call it that, the narrow cabinet of the Minister for Waging War, that literally from the last few days, the return of residents to their homes, and a return when they feel safe, this is the key point, is the formal goal of the current war. Until now, of course, this was an implicit goal. Today these goals have been formalized. In addition, it can be noted that in the Gaza Strip today, for obvious reasons, much fewer forces of the ground army are involved, because the main offensive tasks, not all the main ones, but the main ones in the Gaza Strip have been completed. And this allows Israel to use the maximum, or not the maximum, the optimal, but close to the maximum of ground forces on the northern border. If desired, forces are being transferred, preparations are being conducted. I mean from the point of view of exercises of all units and subdivisions according to the northern scenario. As you rightly said, the plans have been developed. There are different plans of different depths and varying degrees of escalation. Naturally, they are being adjusted. In general, they existed before. And here the issue rests on a political solution at the moment. If it is adopted, it will be a large-scale operation, but then it is not entirely clear according to what scenario they will try to carry it out. It is important to note here that there are two sides to any war. Even if you want, for example, to act according to a limited scenario, this does not mean that everything will go according to your plan, since the enemy will react. And, of course, in my opinion, in order to radically change the rules of the game in the north, some half-hearted and tertiary solutions. We will start here, and not there, and everything will work out in the end. As it looks to me at first glance, this will not be enough. In the event that there is a large-scale war with Hezbollah, it will be a very, very serious undertaking in all respects. Hezbollah surpasses the vast majority of countries in the world in terms of its missile capabilities. I don't know, you can think about and estimate the top there, in the top 5, top 6, top 7 for ballistic missiles, and not only ballistic cruise missiles, drones and so on. And in principle, as a paramilitary structure, stronger than most armies in the world, it is adapted in its capabilities to the confrontation with Israel. And this means that in the Israeli rear, according to the estimated losses, there is such a cynical term as calculated losses. There will be many dead, there will be significant destruction, and of course, there will be serious losses on the battlefield. And this is one of the reasons why it is difficult for the Israeli government to take this step. And, of course, there are other reasons, including American pressure. The famous American strategy, as long as there is nothing at all costs, maintain some kind of calm here and now, and then we'll see, and it doesn't matter what gets worse later. In any case, Israel has reached a new stage in everything that concerns verbal statements. Something interesting has happened in Lebanon in the last couple of days, regarding the explosions of curious devices, and in two ways. Finally, Israel is attacking Hezbollah's positions in southern Lebanon more intensively from the air, and in such a way that it can be perceived by estimating, analyzing what, where and how much, can be perceived as a kind of clearing of the area before certain measures. But until these specific measures are taken, it is, of course, too early to talk about it.
Did you recall the interesting events that have taken place over the past couple of days? Indeed, pages began to explode in Lebanon, then hundreds of walkie-talkies and radios. David, what exactly happened on September 17th? What do you know about this operation? Who can stand behind it?
Who can stand behind it? Everyone is free to draw their own conclusions. There is a well-known principle, look for who benefits. In many cases, this principle does not fail. Israel does not claim responsibility for this operation. In general, this is one of the important principles of the Israeli special services and armies. In many cases, they proceed from such a principle, which in free translation sounds like nebula. Think what you will, we do not take responsibility for certain steps or blows. And this principle, by the way, is sometimes overstepped with it, and sometimes it actually brings significant benefits, and, I emphasize, significant ones, but this is a separate conversation. So, on October 17th, an amazing thing actually happened. Within 15 to 30 days, Hezbollah fighters, as a rule, are not the most rank and file, but those who have quite important duties and commanders of different ranks, received a message distributed among them not by chance, because the pages were issued to them. By the way, there is a video. You can directly see how this message comes and what happens next. And then there was a detonation of thousands of devices. That is, apparently, at least 3,000 devices, or even more. And since this device, as a weapon, is always with them, according to the regulations, in a pocket, bag, hands or next to a particular militant, even a small amount of explosives, and there was really not much of it, as the initial investigation showed, led to the fact that the owners of the pages, almost without exception, suffered during the detonation. There were not many killed, although the number is growing, but most were wounded, with many receiving moderate to severe injuries. And vice versa, very few strangers were injured, because each device was, as they say, on the chest, almost without exception, or on the client's stomach. Well, there are not many explosives, that is, there is little extraneous damage. But as a result of this action, about 2,800 militants, and almost exclusively Hezbollah militants, including commanders of quite high rank, left at once. The operation, of course, and interestingly, the next day there was another wave. That is, when we thought that maybe Israel would try to take advantage of and start a large-scale operation, take advantage of heavy losses, panic, the rupture of Hezbollah's chain of command and start a big operation, Israel did not start a big operation, but the second wave began, this time a device of a different type. The device began to be blown up. It was also very effective, at least 500 wounded, a significant number of killed. By the way, many militants and activists, terrorists, and employees of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps suffered in Iran, including in Syria, because there are also many people in Syria who are tied to Hezbollah. By the way, the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon was injured. He lost an eye, which, however, is not surprising, because the Iranian embassy is a structure that oversees Hezbollah, and the ambassador himself created it at one time, in the 80s. And today, most likely, being an officer of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, of course, he interacts directly with it. It is not surprising that he or one of his escorts had a pager. Thus, the operation turned out to be absolutely amazing from the point of view of professional reconnaissance and sabotage work, where both very interesting technical capabilities associated with new technologies and operational ones were involved. This led to the fact that thousands of militants, and at the moment about 3,500, which is almost 10% of the personnel of the first line, were hit. Hezbollah is believed to have 40,000 reservists and regulars in the first line. Maybe this figure is not entirely correct, but something like this, according to open sources. Disabled, serious panic reigns in the organization and in Lebanon in general, fears that literally anything can explode, well, up to jokes that cigarettes will start exploding tomorrow, that there is a threat from literally all sides. In fact, there are very serious losses, as I have already said, command chains and communication problems that were considered safe. Here is an important explanation that needs to be given why Hezbollah used pages. If on the second day walkie-talkies like Okie-Tokie and other interesting gadgets and devices exploded, then pages would seem to be something from the old days. Many today, young viewers, even, I think, do not remember and do not really understand what it is. They were popular and widespread in the 70s, until the 90s, when classic mobile communication became widespread. The essence of pages is that, unlike mobile devices, computers and various other emitting devices, they do not seem to emit. And therefore, Hezbollah, fearing the very high capabilities of the Israeli special services, firstly, to listen to everything that can be heard and intercept everything that can be intercepted, and therefore to know what is in someone's pocket, what is the name of this person and where he himself is at any moment, and, accordingly, to eliminate him in order to avoid all these consequences. Moreover, in the course of this war, several careless, high-ranking Hezbollah commanders who used mobile phones were eliminated. Security measures were strengthened, 5,000 pages were purchased, which were considered safe from a Taiwanese manufacturer. However, no one who followed the situation, knew what Hezbollah was up to, knew from whom the pages were purchased, and managed to do it. And this is one of the most important achievements of the intelligence point of view, to saddle this scheme. And as a result, this NECTO, not the Taiwanese manufacturer from whom Hezbollah thought it was buying, formally yes, but in fact, the real manufacturer and seller was the same NECTO who was interested in all the benefits for Hezbollah. 55,000 devices were mined. They turned out to be electronic boards, thanks to which they could be activated remotely at the right time. And on September 15, 2017, they were activated. That is, the scheme may have been similar. Perhaps an investigation is underway into Bulgarian and Hungarian companies, which were apparently related to a company that was absolutely fictitious, as we can see now, that was involved in the supply of Taiwanese and, in the case of the walkie-talkies, Japanese equipment. By the way, someone else acted with the radios, although the situation is still developing. The scheme is similar. Someone who should not have done it, someone who is not needed for Hezbollah has intercepted again, and the result is obvious.
Hezbollah militants probably had no idea how highly effective and professional Israel's intelligence services are. As for what kind of company it could be, the New York Times writes that the pages for Hezbollah were manufactured by a Hungarian company, supplied by a Hungarian company, created by Israeli intelligence. That is, even entire companies created by Israeli intelligence, they were the ones who made these pages.
There is some explanation here, it is necessary to give it. Apparently, we are talking about a New York Times report of an earlier stage. Now something is a little more understandable. As for shell companies that are attributed to Israeli intelligence, which implement certain ideas, this situation in itself is not new. This has already happened during various liquidations in the past, when the company served as an excellent cover structure for a variety of activities under the guise of business trips, hiring various employees, and hiring blindly. Employees may not even realize what they're actually doing. They contribute to some kind of conditional illegal sabotage or intelligence activities. All this is a very convenient tool. In this case, the story regarding the Benga company is very interesting. I think there will be both journalistic and intelligence of law enforcement agencies. When we first turned to the Taiwanese, who, in fact, kind of sold these, there is a brand, a Taiwanese brand of pages that was sold in Hezbollah. And as the manufacturer's representative said, Taiwan said that we were a certain Hungarian company, we just gave a brand, in fact, letters, names, and we essentially transferred the right to produce and sell to a Hungarian company, which, apparently, paid the Taiwanese for this as part of legal business relations, and it, they say, is engaged in this. Everyone went to the Hungarian company, and then it turned out that there was simply a registered company in Budapest that had a director. By the way, the director is a girl with 3 higher educations in prestigious institutions. However, the company itself, in fact, does not exist. Once a month they came there for mail. That is, there is a room or an apartment, there is a registration address, there is a general understanding, there is a site in which there were interesting hints, including a quote from Einstein today, there is a funny one with a play on words, however, the site has already been erased, but there was someone who needed to take screenshots. So, in fact, it is obvious that the company is not a manufacturer, that is, we are talking about a fictitious company that organizes exports as a gasket. Further, Hungary realized that no one in Hungary produced anything, and there is already an indication of Bulgar, some Bulgarian company of the same kind, which seemed to be transporting something, but there is no production there either. Where the production took place, how it happened, is not yet clear, but we ourselves can guess that if someone needed to produce pages, he could do it all the way to his territory, or do it on the territory of a certain country. The gasket company was responsible for the delivery. It all looked like a purchase from such a respectable commercial institution. And at the disposal of the company and those who need it, the batch of goods was for a long time. This is if we assume that in general, in fact, they themselves produced this product. And there are 2 options. Either at the production stage, of course, everything was done, or while the batch was in its hands, when some absolutely legal manufacturer did something, handed over this batch, and then those who were needed worked with it. Probably, I can assume that there were tests of devices to see how it all works. Well, then we see the results.
Friends, write your messages, write your comments, questions to our guest, like this broadcast. David, do you have an understanding of why this happened right now, not earlier, not later? There was information from the Israeli media that it could allegedly be for technical reasons, that in recent days there have been fears that the Lebanese group will notice that something is wrong with the pages. But the Russian media and propagandists write that this is allegedly an action to present to society some victories on the eve of the anniversary of October 7th. Well, the second version is that Netanyahu's goal is to provoke a big war in the Middle East in order to draw the United States there, because this may somehow affect Harris's chances of winning the U.S. election.
Well, I don't even know where to start here. Let's start from the very bottom, as they say. First, from a purely military point of view, the following option would be optimal. As I have already said, colossal damage is being inflicted on the enemy, and there was no such analogue in the personnel of such an operation, That the enemy's losses were such that they could be inflicted in long days or, I don't even know, even days of full-fledged hostilities. This kind of reconnaissance operation, which incapacitates thousands of people, including the High Command, is something that inflicts very serious blows, unprecedented. In theory, it would be logical to carry out this kind of operation as the first step before the start of a large-scale combined arms operation, that is, to take advantage of all its fruits. This is panic, and the loss of means of communication, and losses in personnel. But we see that this did not happen, but in 2 episodes such an operation took place. There is an explanation that, for example, those who did this, those who organized all this, understood that the enemy was about to uncover this scheme. How this understanding could arise and whether it arose, I do not know, but theoretically it cannot be ruled out. Another important point. According to the latest data, the pages arrived more than 5 months ago. A lot of time has passed. Since they are all mined, they have alien elements. It is also important to understand that it is impossible to delay this kind of operation for a long time. Somewhere something will break, someone will open something, you never know, suddenly there will be an explosion on the initiative due to some malfunction, and then everything will fly to the flank. The entire organization, all efforts will go to waste. Therefore, this kind of operation certainly had to be implemented in a fairly short time, that is, weeks or months after everything was ready. For years, there was no time to drag it out here. But these are such explanations. So, about imagining some kind of victory before October 7th is, of course, complete nonsense. In any case, this operation was supposed to. Israeli society is not someone who. Yes, of course, this has pleased a lot of people and will continue to please, but everyone remembers October 7th. And these are such things in Israel, unlike in Russia, and, let's say, much less in demand, this kind of approaches. The operation, of course, Israel did not take responsibility for it, but this is the point. There is also a common decision, at least on a vocal and logical level, to intensify the fighting against Hezbollah. Perhaps this is all. This is a big step forward to the fact that, in fact, a large-scale operation begins. Those who made the decision to carry out such an operation, if it was in Israel, were well aware that Hezbollah would be forced to react. For her, this is a painful blow, both material and physical, as well as a blow to prestige. And prestige in our region is extremely important, because if it falls, the allies begin to respect you less, and there are fewer of them, and the enemies begin to mock you and may consider this a reason for more serious actions against you. Therefore, Hezbollah is certainly going to react. How will we look at it, about who tried to drag whom into the war? My opinion, the opinion of many in Israel, is that Israel should launch a large-scale operation on its own initiative, without any connection with this operation, with any connection with it. Unfortunately, despite the losses and the high price, there is no other way to change the rules of the game, and therefore, with regard to dragging out the war, it is not necessary to try to do this in such ways. You can do it, you can and you need to do it yourself, when you consider it necessary and when there are no obstacles. Israel has been attacked, Israel is a victim of aggression, and Israel needs to change these rules. Let's see if there is enough political will. As for the Americans, to get involved, to draw them in. What does it mean to pull in? They are free to get involved, they are free not to get involved. This is not Netanyahu's will. And in any case, if Iran does not fully intervene in the war, then the war, despite the fact that it will be broad, cannot have a direct relationship with the Americans. Well, that is, of course, she has a relationship with them, like everything that happens in the world. Nevertheless, Israel has an interest, as I see it, in launching a large-scale operation in Lebanon. So far, the Israeli government has not decided to do this or has decided, but the step itself has been postponed. Let's wait and see. As I have already said, I have given an explanation of why this happened right now. In any case, even if the fruits of this operation are not used to launch large-scale action right now, it has still caused very serious long-term damage to Hezbollah. including moral and image, and this should not be underestimated. But even the incapacitation of hundreds of militants, many hundreds, if not thousands, of semi-irretrievable and for a while is a very serious achievement from a purely military point of view.
As for the United States, CNN writes that on the eve of the pager bombing, Israel allegedly informed the United States of America about the upcoming operation in Lebanon, but did not provide any details. After a wave of explosions, the Americans told Iran that they were not aware of such an operation, that they had nothing to do with it, and urged, of course, to refrain from escalation. David, how is the United States reacting now to these actions of Israel, and could they not be aware of the impending operation?
They should not be aware of the operation. There are several, firstly, many important operations, both of such a covert sabotage nature and of a more openly military nature. Indeed, Israel does not fully inform the United States. That is, there are cases when it is impossible to inform at all, that's how it is. There are cases when they are notified literally at the last second. For example, I am now conditionally, completely out of touch with reality, saying that in 2 minutes we will attack from the air somewhere in Syria, for example, or somewhere in particular. This is the option, that is, that the Americans would no longer exist, firstly, so that there would be no leakage of information, so that the Americans would not have time to torpedo the operation. That is, so that the Americans do not have the time and opportunity to torpedo, for example, with leaks, attempts to persuade, attempts to use some, let's call it in plain text, agents of influence in Israel. This is a very important factor. If the Americans don't like some of Israel's actions, they can resort to you too. Maybe they will not directly surrender it to the enemy. It seems that it did not come to this, but they have the opportunity to torpedo, press, and so on. And finally, there is a moment, it is simply impossible for unnecessary people to know about the operations. These extra people can even be members of the Israeli leadership and high-ranking officers. If you want to maintain secrecy, you don't have to give the details to anyone. Therefore, from what is known from foreign sources, that is, CNN and other foreign sources, Secretary of Defense Austin was told in general terms shortly before that in Lebanon, this is again said by American sources, something will be in Lebanon in the near future. What will happen? Perhaps, they made it clear in general terms that no, we are not advancing with tanks, there is no special airstrike, something will happen so that they cannot disrupt it, so that there is no time to intervene and talk about nothing. So this is a fairly common practice, but on the other hand, an ally of an American is an ally of Israel. Despite all the disagreements and problems, no matter how you look at it, an ally cannot be set up, and you need to inform him of something. For example, if you take a step, and then suddenly an ally may fly in, for example, the one who was hit will decide that it is the Americans, or the Americans will not be ready for something. That is, the situation here is very delicate, so somewhere you need to report something, sometimes you don't need to report anything at all, and somewhere you need to report without much specifics, but at least so that you are mentally ready.
Well, by the way, it's like with our Kursk operation, when they said that the United States was also not aware that it was being prepared, and we just succeeded in it. Our special services, Ukrainian, also carried out their operation behind enemy lines yesterday. The defense forces of Ukraine hit the largest ammunition depot of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Previously, up to 30,000 tons of various ammunition was stored in warehouses. Iskanders, Tochka-U, Grads. There is an assumption that many of them are now completely destroyed. And, by the way, when opening this warehouse, the Russian authorities stated that it could allegedly withstand even a nuclear strike, but it turned out that it could not even withstand missiles, but simply Ukrainian drones. David, how do you like the work of our forces?
In this case, the result is great. There can be no other definitions here. But I would draw attention to a somewhat broader aspect than just a successful strike on this warehouse, and we will return to it. A strike on this warehouse is not some kind of isolated pinpoint operation or some accidental success. This blow was the fruit, and this is the most important thing, a certain consistent strategy, which he has been adhering to for a very long time. The strategy provides for the development of its own long-range strike capabilities. First of all, this is naturally the intelligence component here, although almost everyone who has a computer at home could know where this warehouse is located and what is on it. But this is in this case. In many others, the reconnaissance component is very important. The desire for defeat is important. And here it was necessary to do, and it continues to be done, a huge amount of work to create drones that are capable of hitting targets in the depths of Russia. And this implies range, it implies reliability, accuracy, noise immunity. And, of course, quantity, because if there are no quantities, and quantity is their mass production, then the results will not be systemic. And, of course, in the future, we can talk about the creation of cruise and ballistic missiles. So, the creation of this system and the choice of a strategy for hitting military targets, in particular, airfields, warehouses with weapons, possibly the military-industrial complex, and separately the enterprises of the oil refining complex in general, the Russian oil industry, this strategy for creating opportunities and then the fact that you adhere to the tasks you have taken on consistently, even when there are failures, even when nothing arrives anywhere and the enemy shot down everything or drones lost their way, all the same, the processes are improving, the tactics, the ammunition itself is new and the sequence takes place. And when these consistent approaches are adhered to, there are loud, bright results. Sometimes the results are not bright, sometimes they are not at all, but sometimes they are such that they show that they have worked and worked not in vain, and if you continue in the same vein, you can to some extent influence the course of the war. And I mean influencing the course of the war not only in the media sphere, because when this happens, everyone discusses it, this is a blow to the prestige of Russia and so on, and the Kremlin personally. It also works in some way, perhaps, to intimidate mutual deterrence and, most importantly, it destroys serious resources. So the strike in Toropets, that's how this city is called, to my slight surprise, was apparently the most resounding success, the most effective Ukrainian strike of all those inflicted in the depths of Russia on warehouses, because the airfield is a target of a different order. Of course, you can compare the airfield with this, but if we are talking about warehouses, it was certainly the most successful strike. Perhaps it is even the most successful, including the affected warehouses on the territory of occupied Ukraine. But there were also very successful strikes, especially when only the HIMARS arrived, where the Russians did not pull the warehouses into smaller ones and did not move them beyond the zone of destruction by the HIMARS. There were some very good shots, if I remember correctly. I just don't remember how much they compare to this. In any case, this warehouse, by the way, about that atomic statement about withstanding an atomic explosion is, of course, nonsense. But I must say the following part, as far as can be judged preliminarily from the pictures, is preliminarily part of the concrete shelters that they built just specifically so that there was less chance of hitting them, both with the embankment and made of concrete, they withstood, as far as we can judge this preliminarily. The problem is that a significant part of the shelters, the problem for Russia is that a significant part of the shelters were not of this level. And besides, judging by the preliminary data, I really don't think they are final. They managed, despite the fact that this is a modern warehouse, there are concrete shelters and so on, to store a lot of ammunition at least part of the time in the open air. And as a result, a series of detonations turned out to be enough to start this chain reaction, the detonation of everything that is possible, that is not in modern concrete shelters, and maybe even in them. The result is again obvious, serious damage has been caused, which is an incentive to continue work in the same vein, including the improvement of means of destruction. Here, by the way, is an example for you. If at least some of the concrete shelters survived, what does this mean? It is necessary to have means capable of destroying ammunition, because, if I am not mistaken, according to Russian information, up to 240 tons of ammunition could be stored in each concrete shelter. So, the ability to hit concrete shelters in this kind of warehouses and in other places is an important opportunity to strive for. And what do you need for this? This requires, firstly, accuracy, noise immunity and sufficient power of the warhead. Unless, of course, these are really such thick shelters that I don't know what, and I'm afraid they are not like that. So, a sufficient mass of the warhead, sufficient accuracy and noise immunity, and even this kind of shelter will not become sufficient protection.
Now there are very different versions of what they could hit that arsenal with. Someone says that perhaps these are Polyanitsia jet drones, perhaps even the Ukrainian Neptune. What do you think can be the version here? And I even heard that these may be Western missiles, and we were allegedly secretly given such permission, but this has not yet been officially announced. Is this a fantastic version, or should it not be rejected either?
Regarding Western missiles, permission was given, but not announced. I'm not talking about this case, I'm talking about it at all. As for the situation in general, this is more than realistic. At one time, the first ATACMS arrived secretly. It was not announced, since with a range of 160 kilometers in a cassette version. Then they flew to airfields in the Berdyansk area, if I am not mistaken, and in the Luhansk region. So in terms of announcement, everything is not necessary, although so much has already been said about this topic that in any case, the Russians should proceed, and they proceed from the considerations that they will give permission, or have already given it. That is, so that there is no military secret here. By and large, this is true or not. If we knew that some interesting concrete shelters were hit, that the primary defeat was concrete shelters, which required, firstly, very high accuracy, and secondly, a powerful warhead, then this discussion would be very interesting. In fact, a Beaver drone, like, go find out, maybe it can, but break through a thick concrete wall, that is, theoretically. But the fact is that a lot of ammunition was either outside at all, or was in shelters much more primitive. And here we come to the assumption that no matter what flies, apparently, a fairly light ammunition would have been enough to start exploding something that is not in these particularly serious concrete shelters. That is, it could be Polyanitsia. By the way, Polyanitsia is not a powerful ammunition. We know approximately its size, at least what is shown. The dimensions indicate that the warhead is not very powerful. The speed, yes, its speed is higher than a regular drone, yes, it is theoretically possible to make greater penetration, but this is not something that should hit very serious shelters. That is, the advantage of Polyanitsia, as I see it, is precisely in the short flight time and in the fact that it is more difficult to get it with small arms due to its speed. And, perhaps, it is at a low altitude, we do not know. And then it is difficult to detect it by traditional means of detecting air defense. It could have been, so I will still express doubts about Western missiles, but we will learn about their use. If, say, Storm Shadow starts about him, then there will be evidence, there will be an understanding of this, and at the same time there will be an understanding of what goals have been given permissions. So I will assume that since it all probably did not begin with the defeat of especially fortified hangars, they could have flown in and could well have been. This is the most rational version for me, quite ordinary drones from among those that attack Russia on a daily basis. Some 10 to 20 kilograms of explosives, getting into a thin storage facility and goodbye. I'm not talking about ammunition that is stored in the open air, any little thing is enough here.
David, please assess the effectiveness and importance of this strike, because there is an assumption that it may affect both the preparation of a massive missile attack on Ukraine and directly the situation on a particular segment of the front, and the media write that the importance of destroying this depot will be felt immediately in the North Russian grouping.
Важность уничтожения этого склада будет ощущаться сразу в группировке севера российской.
It is clear here that there are all kinds of statements. It is clear that people are actively discussing this. But in order for us to approach the issue seriously, literally seriously, we need to know some facts, some information. That is, there are reports of what could have exploded there and how, but strictly speaking, such reports need to be confirmed. Or it is intelligence that has documents, but, of course, it does not show them, and we, as observers from the outside, do not have exact confirmation of what kind of ammunition was there. If we knew how many things exploded, we could estimate. But I will say this, whether there were conditionally Iskanders or important air defense missiles, this is very important. If there were Iskander missiles or air defense missiles, this is a strike on this area. This suggests that the shelling of Ukraine with this kind of systems will decrease in the near future. But if this is not even so, and if let's give the simplest option, 82mm mines and rockets for Grad installations. 82mm and 120mm mines are what fly at the Ukrainian military on the front line on a daily basis in huge quantities. Imagine, I'm just saying now that because of explosions of this kind, this impact, there will be 10% fewer mines. I am modest on purpose. 10% may not be enough at first glance, but 10% is the intensity of fire and the lives of the Ukrainian military on a daily basis. This is important. Whatever it is important in its field. It may turn out, I can say that it makes life easier for the military on the battlefield using the example of such ammunition as a mine shell. If these are air defense missiles, the Russians will have fewer of them, which means that the same depots or others will be more defenseless. If it is even a dozen Iskanders, then a dozen fewer Iskanders will arrive in the next couple of months. These are saved lives, these are saved objects. Whatever it was, a lot of ammunition was destroyed. Even if each of them is not very valuable individually, it is still a significant mass. But here it is important to always remember the very consistency. In itself, this is a colossal achievement and a consequence of a systematic approach, but in order for the impact on the war to continue, for the shelling to really decrease, for there to be less air defense in Russia, so that fewer mines and shells fly at the Ukrainian military right on the front line, we need to continue. And we need smaller, greater results, but consistent, continuous. And only then a certain permanent significant effect is achieved, which can be noticed over time.
The Russian army has gathered 37,000 soldiers in the Kursk region so that by October 15, the Kremlin authorities want them to be able to oust the armed forces of Ukraine from the Kursk region. This is reported by sources of RBC Ukraine and say that the Kremlin regime plans to assemble a group for a large-scale counteroffensive in the Kursk region in a ratio of 5-1. But they also plan to create a so-called buffer zone on the territory of the border regions bordering Russia by October 30th. At the same time, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine says that the Russian counteroffensive has been stopped in the Kursk region. The armed forces of Ukraine thwarted the invaders' attempt to restore positions in the Kursk region, while they say that our army has successes there. David, how do you analyze the situation, and these plans are realistic, or will they still remain only on paper?
I am always cautious about the information voiced that the Kremlin has set a particular date. By the way, after looking at what is happening during the war, we understand that this information was unequivocally wrong in many cases, that they ordered to take something by the new year, that by such and such a date there will be a strike. This often did not happen. Moreover, there were no obvious attempts. I don't know if they have an order to do something by the date, but there are facts on the ground. The facts on the ground indicate that there was an attempt not at a full scale, but at such a limited offensive. It had some limited success at the beginning and seems to have been suspended for the moment. But this does not mean that the Russians will abandon their plans. By October 15th or another date, they intend to oust the Ukrainians from the Kursk region in any case, although this is not the highest priority. The main priority is the Pokrovskoye direction, as far as we understand, in the broad sense of the word, and they almost did not withdraw troops from it, or did not withdraw them at all. Perhaps, by the way, I do not rule out that they even hope that the Ukrainians themselves will leave the Kursk region, that they will not have to fight for it, in the literal sense of the word. But the grouping, the formation of the grouping is going on, this is obvious, and I assume that it is quite close to its completion, which means that we will see offensive actions again, maybe of a more limited level, maybe quite broad, but they will not abandon this idea. On the other hand, as we can see, the Russian army has extra forces, they do not have forces. In the Kursk region, initially there were very few forces capable of defending it, and this led to the corresponding result, and so much time later, very slowly, with grief in heart, they are assembling a group, which, I don't know, 37,000 people. I think that 37,000 is in a very broad sense, including the cover of other sections of the border, because, As is commonly believed, the Ukrainians entered the Kursk region with several thousand. German military sources spoke of 4–6,000, and several thousand more direct support in the Sumy region. If we are talking, say, about 4 to 6,000 now, then 37,000 is more than 5 times more than the Ukrainian group. In any case, the Ukrainian authorities and the Ukrainian command will face a very serious choice. Holding this part of the Kursk region means serious resources, both human and in terms of ammunition, in terms of military equipment. All this does not seem to be necessary in other areas, and therefore it will always be necessary to weigh the pros and cons. Is it necessary to hold it? For how long? What losses are acceptable? To monitor what the enemy is doing. For example, if they transfer troops from very important directions, where it becomes easier, this is one thing, and if they do not transfer, then another. In general, the most important thing is ahead after the successes that have been achieved in the Kursk region, because everything is connected with other sectors of the front, and everything is connected with the pros and cons that each operation and each action has.
David, thank you very much for the conversation, for finding time for our broadcast. I wish you a good and peaceful day. And let me remind you that David Sharp was in touch with us. You, friends, put your likes, write comments, share this video, and, of course, subscribe to our YouTube channels. Thank you all for your attention. Good news. Take care of yourself and see you.
Thank you, Anastasia. More good news and all the best to our viewers.
Спасибо.